I was still in my black dress, standing just a few feet away from my father's casket, when my sister smiled at me like she'd already won everything, and maybe she had, because 10 minutes later, the lawyer cleared his throat, read the will, and just like that, she walked away with $52 million while I stood there with absolutely nothing, not even a mention, not even a goodbye, just silence, like I never existed, and before I could even process it, she turned to the security guard. She had somehow already arranged and said, "She's not family anymore, please remove her." And I remember the way people stared at me as I was escorted out of my own father's funeral, humiliated, confused, completely blindsided. But what none of them knew, what she definitely didn't know, was that my dad had always been 10 steps ahead of everyone, and while she was busy celebrating her new fortune, there was one thing he left behind, something small, something easy to overlook, something with my name on it, and 3 days later, that one thing would make her lose everything. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 28, married, and until a week ago, I thought I understood exactly how my family worked. My sister Rachel was always the favorite, the one my dad showed off, the one who got the best schools, the best opportunities, the best everything, while I was just there, the quiet one who didn't ask for much and learned early on not to expect anything either. But even then, I never imagined it would end like that, with me being erased from his will like I meant nothing, because despite everything, I still believed my dad loved me in his own complicated way. I mean, he used to call me late at night just to check in, ask about my husband Daniel, tell me to take care of myself. Little things that didn't match the version of him everyone else saw, and that's why standing outside that funeral, watching my own sister celebrate while I had nothing, didn't just hurt, it felt wrong, like there was something missing, something no one was saying out loud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my dad wasn't the kind of man to leave things unfinished, not like that. Not without a reason. I didn't go home right away after the funeral. I just sat in my car gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands started shaking, replaying everything in my head, the way Rachel barely looked at me, the way the lawyer avoided my eyes, the way security stepped in like it had all been planned in advance, and the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense, because my dad was many things, distant, controlling, obsessed with appearances, but he wasn't careless. He didn't just forget people, especially not me, and that's when my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize, and for a second I almost ignored it, but something told me not to, so I answered, and a calm, professional voice on the other end said, "Emily, this is Mr. Hargrove, your father's attorney. I believe we need to meet privately," and my heart dropped because he had just read the will. There was nothing left to discuss, or at least that's what I thought. So I asked him what this was about, and there was a pause before he said, "There are instructions that were not disclosed at the reading," and just like that, every nerve in my body went on edge, because suddenly it felt like I wasn't crazy for thinking something was off, so I agreed to meet him the next morning, and when I hung up, I finally drove home, where my husband Daniel was already waiting, pacing the living room like he had been expecting bad news, and the moment he saw my face, he stopped and just pulled me into a hug without saying a word, which honestly made it harder to hold it together, because I didn't even know how to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone you just got written out of your own father's life? Completely erased. Like you were nothing. But once I did, once I told him everything, including the call from the lawyer, his entire expression changed, not shocked, not confused, just focused, like he already saw something I didn't, and he asked me one simple question. "Did your dad ever give you anything separately, anything he told you to keep safe?" And at first I said no, because nothing came to mind, but then I hesitated, because there was something small and almost meaningless at the time, about 6 months ago my dad had asked me to come by his office alone, which was unusual in itself, and when I got there, he didn't sit behind his desk like he normally did. He just handed me a small envelope and said, "Don't open this unless you really have to," and of course I had asked what it was, but he just smiled in that vague way he always did and said, "You'll know when the time is right," and I remember leaving that day feeling confused but not thinking much of it. I had tossed the envelope into a drawer at home and completely forgotten about it, until now, and the second that memory hit me, I looked at Daniel and said, "I think I know what he meant," and without wasting another second, I went straight to our bedroom, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope, still sealed, still exactly where I had left it, and suddenly everything felt heavier, like whatever was inside that piece of paper had been waiting for this exact moment, and as I held it in my hands, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. If my dad had planned this, if he had really set something aside for me, then Rachel didn't just take everything from me, she walked straight into something she didn't even see coming. I didn't open the envelope right away, which might sound strange, but in that moment it felt like breaking a seal I couldn't undo, like whatever was inside would change everything permanently, and I needed a second to breathe before stepping into that. But Daniel didn't hesitate. He gently took my hand and said, "Emily, this is exactly what your dad wanted. You don't wait on something like this," and he was right, so I sat down on the edge of the bed, slowly slid my finger under the flap, and opened it, and inside there were only two things, a folded document and a small silver key taped to the back, nothing flashy, nothing that looked like $52 million, but the second I unfolded the paper, my heart started pounding because at the top, in bold letters, it read Ownership Transfer Agreement, and beneath it was my name, not Rachel's, not anyone else's, mine, and as I read further, my confusion turned into disbelief, because it wasn't just any asset, it was my dad's primary company, the one everyone assumed Rachel would inherit along with the money, the one that had built our entire family fortune, and according to the document, it had been legally transferred into my name 6 months ago, quietly, privately, completely separate from the will, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The reason Rachel got the money, the reason I got nothing at the reading, because the real power, the real control, had already been given to me long before he died. And for a second I just sat there in silence, trying to process the weight of it, because this wasn't just some hidden gift, this was everything, and Daniel leaned in closer, reading over my shoulder, and let out a low breath before saying, "She thinks she won, doesn't she?" And I almost laughed, except it didn't feel funny yet, not when I knew exactly how my sister operated. Rachel didn't just like winning, she needed to dominate, to control, and there was no way she had any idea what this meant, because if she did, she wouldn't have been so quick to throw me out like I was nothing. And that's when my phone buzzed again, but this time it was her, Rachel, calling me for the first time since the funeral, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But something told me to answer, so I did, and the second I picked up, her voice came through sharp and impatient. "I need you to come by Dad's house, now." No greeting, no apology, just a command, like she was already used to being in charge, and I asked her why, even though I had a feeling I already knew, and she exhaled like I was wasting her time and said, "There are documents missing from his office, important ones, and since you were the last one he met with, I assume you know something." And I could practically hear the suspicion in her voice, but what stood out more was the urgency, the edge of panic she was trying to hide, and that's when it really hit me. She had started digging, and whatever she found, it wasn't adding up the way she expected. So I told her I'd be there, kept my tone neutral, and hung up, and as I looked back at the document in my hands, I realized this was it, the moment everything started to shift, because Rachel wasn't calling me out of concern, she was calling because something in her perfect inheritance wasn't working, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one walking into that house at a disadvantage. This time, I was walking in with something she didn't even know existed yet, and judging by the way her voice sounded, she was already closer to finding out than she realized. When I walked into my dad's house the next morning, everything looked exactly the same, perfectly arranged, cold, controlled, like nothing had changed. But the tension in the air told a completely different story, because Rachel was already there, pacing back and forth in the living room with her phone in her hand, barking orders at someone on the other end, and the second she saw me, she hung up and turned, her expression tight, forced, like she was trying to stay in control but was already slipping, and for a brief moment, neither of us spoke, we just stared at each other, and I could see it, the calculation behind her eyes, the way she was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I didn't, and then she finally broke the silence with a sharp, almost accusing tone. "You went through his office before the reading, didn't you?" And I kept my voice calm, steady, and said, "No, Rachel, I didn't," which wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either, and that only seemed to frustrate her more, because she crossed her arms and said, "Well, something's wrong, the financial accounts aren't lining up, there are restrictions, holds, approvals I can't override, and the bank is asking for authorization that I should already have." And hearing that, I had to fight the urge to react, because everything she was describing pointed directly to what I had just discovered: the company, the control, the fact that she didn't actually have access to what she thought she owned. And instead of answering her directly, I asked, "Did the lawyer explain everything to you?" And that's when something in her expression cracked, just for a second, because she looked away before snapping back, "I don't need explanations, I need access, and right now I don't have it." And there it was, the panic she had been trying to hide finally surfacing, because for the first time, Rachel wasn't in control of the situation, and she hated it. And then she stepped closer to me, lowering her voice like she was trying to keep this contained. "If you took something from his office, anything, you need to give it back, now." And I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because of how wrong she was about everything. She thought I had stolen something, like I was scrambling for scraps, when in reality, my dad had handed me the entire foundation of what she was trying to control. And for a moment, I considered telling her right then, just watching her reaction as everything fell apart in real time. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she had me escorted out like I was nothing. Maybe it was the years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like I didn't matter. Because this wasn't just about proving her wrong. This was about letting her fully understand what it felt like to lose control, piece by piece, just like she had done to me. So instead, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Maybe you should talk to the lawyer again." And the way her face tightened told me that wasn't the answer she wanted. And before she could respond, my phone rang, and when I glanced down at the screen, I saw the name that made everything pause, Mr. Hargrove, and I answered it right there, without breaking eye contact with her, and his voice came through clear and direct. "Emily, the board is requesting your presence this afternoon. There's been confusion regarding leadership," and that was it. The confirmation, the moment everything shifted from suspicion to reality. And as I slowly lowered the phone, I saw it happen, the exact second Rachel realized she wasn't the one in charge, because whatever she thought she inherited, it wasn't enough. And for the first time in her life, she was standing in front of me without control, without answers, and without any idea how bad things were about to get. By the time I walked into the boardroom that afternoon, I could already feel the shift in power, not just in the way people looked at me, but in the way they stood when I entered, the way conversations stopped, the way every single person in that room knew something Rachel didn't. And sitting at the far end of the table were the board members who had worked with my dad for years, people who had barely acknowledged me before, now watching me like I was the one they had been waiting for. And as I took my seat, Mr. Hargrove gave me a small nod before addressing the room, explaining that due to the previously executed transfer agreement, effective immediately, I was the majority owner and acting CEO of the company. And even hearing it out loud felt surreal, but the reaction around the table made it real. Because no one argued, no one questioned it, they accepted it, like it had been inevitable all along. And that's when the door suddenly opened, and Rachel walked in, uninvited, her expression tight with frustration, like she had already been fighting battles she didn't understand. And the moment she saw me sitting at the head of the table, something in her face shifted from anger to disbelief, because this wasn't a rumor anymore, this was real. And she stepped forward, her voice sharp, almost desperate. "What is this?" And before I could answer, Mr. Hargrove calmly explained the situation again, slower this time, making sure every word landed. And I watched as Rachel's confidence started to unravel, piece by piece, because everything she thought she controlled, the accounts, the assets, the influence, it all traced back to this company, and that company was mine. And she tried to argue, tried to push back, saying there had to be some mistake, that the will clearly stated she inherited everything. But that's when one of the board members leaned forward and said, "The will covers liquid assets, Miss Carter, not corporate ownership." And just like that, the illusion shattered completely, because she finally understood the truth. The money she inherited wasn't independent, it was tied to the company's structure, the approvals, the distributions, the access. All of it required authorization from the majority owner, which meant me. And the look on her face in that moment was something I will never forget, because it wasn't just anger anymore, it was fear, real fear, the kind that comes when you realize you're not in control of your own situation. And then she turned to me, her voice softer now, almost pleading, "Emily, we can work this out." And I had to pause for a second, not because I was considering it, but because of how quickly she had shifted, how easily she went from throwing me out to asking for my help. And it would have been easy to give in. to take the high road, to smooth things over, but I remembered standing outside that funeral, being treated like I didn't exist, and I realized something in that moment. This wasn't revenge, this was balance. This was everything being said exactly where it was supposed to be, so I looked at her calmly and said, "You already made your decision, Rachel," and then I turned to the board and continued the meeting like she wasn't even there anymore, because for the first time, I wasn't the one being dismissed, she was, and as security gently stepped in to escort her out, the same way she had done to me just days before, I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel satisfaction, I just felt something settle inside me. Like everything had finally come full circle, and this time, I was the one standing in control. 3 days later, Rachel showed up at my house, but this time there was no confidence, no sharp tone, no control, just quiet desperation as she stood at my door asking if we could fix things, and I listened, calmly, as she tried to explain how everything had fallen apart, the accounts frozen, the investors pulling back, the reality finally hitting her that the money she thought she owned wasn't truly hers without my approval, and for a moment, I saw the same person who had me escorted out of my father's funeral, only now she was the one being shut out, and I realized this wasn't about destroying her, it was about understanding consequences, so I told her the truth, that I wasn't going to take everything from her, but I wasn't going to hand her control either, she would have to earn her place, just like I had to rebuild mine, and as she stood there, realizing I meant it, I closed the door gently, not out of anger, but closure, because for the first time, I wasn't living in her shadow, I was standing on my own, exactly where my dad had planned for me to be. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: karma doesn't rush, but when it arrives, it doesn't miss. So if you believe in standing your ground and letting truth win, make sure you subscribe, because stories like this are just the beginning.